Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to a new episode of the Inside Analysis for the Jewish People Policy Institute. There is obviously a lot that is going on as the war in Israel sometimes seems stuck. Sometimes it looks like it's moving forward. Sometimes we have a good relationship with the Americans, sometimes a bad relationship. It's like this one step forward, two step backward type of tango that Israel is in, whether it's with Hamas over the possible release of prisoners and a hostage deal that would see some of the hostages at least come home, but what would exactly mean for the continuation of the war, as well as for Prime Minister Netanyahu's political career. On the other hand, the offensive in Rafah, limited for the time being, could be wider in scope and leading to the Americans not just to threaten, but to actually stop physically the delivery of strategic weaponry for the state of Israel and for the president himself to make these comments on live television. So there's a lot to talk about. And thankfully, I'm joined today by somebody who has a lot to say on all of these different issues. Einat Wilf, who is a former member of Knesset, a former senior fellow at JPPI, a renowned writer and speaker on behalf of the state of Israel, foresaw to all of our listeners and viewers. You've seen Einat a few times here, but was one of the people who really was talking about UNRWA before everyone else was talking about UNRWA. But we're here today with Einat to talk about a course that she gave in Georgetown University about Zionism, the history of Zionism, how it's evolved over the years, as well as the manifestation of anti-Zionism, and become something that I think is very relevant in today's discourse because of how anti-Zionism is often disguised as the new form of anti-Semitism. So we're going to talk to Einat about this course because most recently, just in the last couple of weeks, it's been uploaded online for all people to get access to, cut into 5 or 6 different episodes. So everybody will be able to watch it and learn from it. So we'll dive into that in just one moment. But before we do, Einat, since you're already here, let's talk for just a moment about the suspension of weapons to the state of Israel. And let me just preface by saying that, in my view, at least, for what it's worth, I was thinking back to precedents. So 2014, Obama, as president, doesn't allow the delivery of some Hellfire missiles. That was a big deal at the time. That was during the Gaza war in the summer of 2014. After the bombing of the Osirak reactor in 1981, everyone remembers President Reagan freezes temporarily the delivery of F-15 jets to Israel, gets unfrozen quite quickly. The big difference I see here, to an extent, is that 1981, very limited in scope, very limited in time. 2014, the administration never really admitted to it. They never said it publicly. It was all these different reports, Wall Street Journal, others. Here, we have the president on record saying it. We have the defense secretary, Lloyd Austin, on record saying it. The Americans, the top most senior officials are saying, we're not happy with Israel, and as a result, we're basically punishing Israel. And for that reason, and not to mention the fact that we're also, unlike 2014, when it was towards the end of the Gaza war, unlike 81, when it was after the bombing had already taken place, we're in the middle of a war with Hamas. We're getting bombarded daily by Hezbollah. So to cut off the weapons now sends a terrible message, number one, to our enemies. But number two, in my view, crosses a red line that now every administration that comes next will say, we could do this too. We could do more than just this. So now, what are your thoughts?
So I'm confused. I'm mostly not clear at what they're hoping to achieve, not in the immediate sense of forcing Israel to do their bidding, but in terms of the broader sense of what the message is. Now, historically, my view was that America can afford to not understand the world and to be very mediocre at best at foreign policy because it is just incredibly lucky. It is separated from the world by 2 great oceans, and America can afford to allow the world to burn and then come at the last moment, as it did in World War I or World War II, and kind of save the day with very, very little consequences for the US mainland. So you can see that kind of different perspective here. the US has essentially decided that the war is over 3 or 4 months ago. It was very clear from all the messages, from the behaviors. I mean, as far as they were concerned, the war was over 3 or 4 months ago. And the way that they spoke about it made it seem as if they think that Israel and Gaza is like America and Afghanistan, somewhere like halfway around the world, and kind of wrap it up, boys, and go home. And I'm thinking, do they understand that this is at our doorstep? This is
Right.
not some kind of halfway around the world. And this misunderstanding of basic geography seems to me going on quite a bit. You saw the vice president say a while ago that the Palestinians in Rafah have nowhere to go. And I remember thinking, does Egypt not appear on American maps? So kind of like the disappearing border with Egypt seems to never play a role. So I'm confused in the broader sense that, are we seeing a replay of the Truman Doctrine in the late 50s, when they thought that they could throw Israel under the bus and thereby appease the Arab world? And it was a complete disaster. Even politically, I must say, I don't think this makes any sense. People say Michigan. There's just been data that John Fetterman now enjoys like 80% approval ratings. And this has been my feeling from the beginning, that the Americans would actually appreciate someone who just clearly says, Israel needs to win. We're going to be there until Israel wins and Hamas surrenders, and the Palestinians need to go through a process of changing their entire core belief systems away from the river to the sea, and we're sticking by Israel. I think this would have been even political, except for being the right thing to do. I think it would have been politically more beneficial than this, as you described, one step forward, two backwards, this waffling, this back and forth, which just sends a terrible message also to America's allies. What is the message exactly they're sending to the region? So politically, I don't get it. Regionally, I don't get it. I actually don't see how they think it's beneficial. And the only explanation I have is that America can afford to make foreign policy mistakes, which Israel cannot.
So if it's not politically motivated, it's not because, oh, I'm going to get more votes in Michigan, I being Biden, or Pennsylvania, or wherever it might be. Definitely
It
not going
might
to.
be politically motivated. I just think it's wrong.
No, I understand. And, definitely won't help him in Florida. It's not it's stupid foreign policy. Let's agree. But maybe it's also personal, and all politics are personal to some extent. And it's no secret at the end of the day that the prime minister of our country, Netanyahu, and the Biden administration, they don't exactly get along, right? Maybe that's an understatement. I've had a few conversations with some members of the administration. They do not look fondly at all at the prime minister. They view him to be a liar, a cheater, somebody whose word is no word. They have zero trust between them. Maybe that's part of it also. Maybe it's this feeling, and something that probably a lot of us here in Israel have wanted to shy away from because we don't want to believe it's possible. And definitely, I don't want to believe it's possible that this war is just dragging on because it's convenient for him politically. And maybe the Americans feel that that is actually the truth.
So I'll take it in a few elements. If it's merely the personal animosity, that is juvenile. And for an empire, for a country like the United States to make foreign policy this way would be best described as juvenile. But again, will not be the first time. We know that the Biden administration for the first year basically did everything that like opposite of Trump just because it was Trump. So they stopped the momentum of the Abraham Accords for a whole year. They refused to call them the Abraham Accords. It took them a whole year to pick them up. And by then, much of the momentum was gone. So a juvenile personal foreign policy, it would not, I mean, it's still juvenile, but it's not as if they didn't do that just because they hate somebody. But it's stupid, certainly for a country that claims to be a global hegemon. In terms of Netanyahu, I agree within Israel that this is what's going on. He's I mean, I agree that for him, declaring an end to the war carries political repercussions. And, you know, he's the kind of person that survives by keeping 7 balls in the air and always juggling and managing competing pressures, but never actually making decisions, never actually solving problems. That's how we got to this point. So I agree with the criticism on him. But I would say this, if this is your problem, a personal problem, then in this case, I would say, do a bit like what your contender is doing. Just be really simple and say, dear Israelis, we cannot work with this prime minister. As long as he's your prime minister, there will be no arms. You know what? Fine. But this kind of waffly sort of here, that's the worst of all possible worlds. And again, when the fact that the prime minister is incredibly unpopular in Israel is not because the war is unpopular, it's because the waffling is driving people crazy. I'm sure you know there's a mood of despair here in Israel because people are saying this. If we gave away the kitchen sink, we essentially gave Hamas everything already. We're supplying them generously. The IDF is now the Israeli supply army for Gaza. It's no longer about defending Israel. It's about making sure that supplies enter Gaza. This is how soldiers are dying. So we already gave away that. We're allowing people to go up north. The war is essentially over. The military is out. So if we've already surrendered, we should have done that 3 months ago and get the hostages. Or if we really want to win, then let's fight already. But from all directions, I think people are going nuts with this 7 balls in the air juggling. And America is not helping with its waffling as well.
And part of this is also just the indecisiveness that we have here, the indecision in 100%. I mean, like, you know, even about the Rafah operation, it's like, okay, we go into Rafah. There's 15,000 Hamas guys. We kill 9,000. Wow. We minimize civilian casualties. And then what? Right? What's the next step? Like, when do we say we're done? And let's say the hostages are still there and Sinwar and Def are not killed. So is it a victory? Is it not a victory? Have we met the total victory? I think there's a lot of issues here. And this is a great segue to Zionism, because Zionism was the movement of decision. It was the movement of grabbing the reins and of the Jewish people saying, we are taking control of our destiny and taking responsibility for what's going to happen. So talk to us, Einat. I mean, you know, give me kind of the background about the course, give me a bit of background of what it entails, what it includes, why people should listen and learn. And then let's talk also just a bit about, you know, we're also talking just before Yom Ha'atzmaut. So, you know, we're coming up on our 76th anniversary as a country, which obviously is a loaded one this year with everything going on. But there's obviously the whole anti-Zionism movement, which I'd also like to talk about. So let's first give us just some details about the course and what it includes.
So this is a free course that's available to all. It was produced by my student, Zoe Tara Zeigerman. 5 episodes that look at the history of Zionism and anti-Zionism beginning in the 19th century. It's based on the course I gave in Georgetown a couple years ago called Zionism and Anti-Zionism. Zoe was one of my students, and she had the vision and the execution, which is quite remarkable, to make sure that this course is available to all. She came up to me at the end of the course at the time, and she said this course was more valuable to her than dozens of hours of therapy. And it was through her that I realized that anti-Zionism on campus takes an emotional toll on students because it operates like a dynamic of bullying, which constantly demands Jewish students to more and more mutilate their Jewish identity. I called it the pound of flesh. So the course basically looks at 5 pairs of Zionism and anti-Zionism. The first looks at emancipation and the birth of political Zionism. The second looks at labor Zionism as contrasted with socialism and communism and Bundism. The third looks at Christianity and Jewish religion, how they theologically both can support Zionism and anti-Zionism. The fourth episode looks at Arab anti-Zionism and the birth of the State of Israel. And the fifth one, which is very relevant to the campuses, it looks at secular and Soviet and left-wing anti-Zionism and how it has made its way to international bodies and academia where it flourishes today. So this is, oh, go ahead.
No, please.
So this is basically the course. When the course was over in Georgetown, I told the students that they now belong to a select group of people who actually know what they're talking about when they talk about Zionism and anti-Zionism. And when we see people like Jill Stein posting, oh, on Zionism, and like nothing is true or makes sense. So many people claim to know what it is and what it's not and what anti-Zionism is. And sometimes there's just no alternative to properly studying a topic. So in 5 episodes of 40 minutes each, I can say that people who will go through this course, and there's also a study guide and material to read, you will have the level of education that will be far and above a lot of the people today who talk about it.
Idea. Maybe you put up a big screen at Columbia, Harvard Yard, and some of these other places and just project the course, because clearly a lot of these kids need an education in what Zionism is. I mean, listen, you know, the thing that I often think about when it comes, first of all, they can obviously, people can educate themselves. They can read. I mean, this is going to be a great resource. I've looked at it, watched a couple of the videos. You know, it's extremely important, and it's a great foundation for people who need some of that more historical context, definitely, of where this all comes from and how it's grappled with different challenges over the years. But something when you think about it, Zionism has not been this huge success in the sense for the, it's been a success in Israel, it's been a success for the Jewish people, but not for the world understanding what it is. I think a lot of people think, oh, Zionism, white colonialism. Like, oh, where did that mistake come?
So the course really deals with it in the 5th episode, where I begin by saying that the Soviet Union does not get enough credit for its contribution to the global spread of anti-Zionism and Jew hate in general. That's been one of the most fascinating elements, and it's based also on the work of scholars like Isabella Tabarovsky, looking how the Soviet Union, beginning mostly in the 60s, but even before, replaced the original protocols of the Elders of Zion, the Tsarist anti-Semitism, with the new respectability of academic anti-Zionism. And they pursued the idea of anti-Zionism as this respectable mask where you could get PhDs in anti-Zionism. The Palestinian leadership for years got their PhDs essentially in
Abu
Holocaust.
Mazen himself in Holocaust
Exactly.
denial. Yeah, right.
Precisely, and anti-Zionism and Holocaust inversion. And this was exported to Western academia, initially in left-wing circles in Europe, and then it was transferred to the Anglo world where it flourishes today. They inserted it through international bodies, laundering what I call the placard strategy, the equation of Israel and Zionism and the Star of David with all of the world's evils, like you mentioned, colonialism, white supremacy, racism, Nazism, genocide. This has been something that has been in operation for decades now. People say it today as if they discovered it, as if this is because of what's happening in Gaza or because of Netanyahu. But when you study the history, you realize that no one today is actually saying something new. That's one of the main insights of the course, that nothing that is being said today is new. All of it has been said before, all of it has been created and actually prepared before with the goal of creating respectability for anti-Zionism. And once you see it, you actually can't unsee it.
Which means what exactly? Once you see what?
Once you see that Zionism is racism, colonialism, apartheid, this endless repetition. I mean, when you think of it, it's an ingenious strategy because it works like a nursery rhyme. It goes through this endless repetition of equating Israel, Zionism, and the Star of David with words that connote evil. The words apartheid, genocide, Nazism,
which are trigger
racism,
words for the West and for definitely liberal progressives to a large extent.
exactly, because everyone agrees they're evil. So what essentially happens is that people are exposed to this ongoing refrain of Israel, Zionism, Star of David equal evil. Israel, Zionism, Star of David equal evil. Now, if there's an evil out there, then you must eradicate it by any means necessary. Violence, any means necessary becomes justified, righteous even. I'm sure you've seen those placards that say, keep the world clean, with the Star of David inside the trash bin. That placard is actually the logical endpoint of the placard strategy. Because if Israel, Zionism, Star of David equal evil, then you want to rid the world of that evil. And then we go back to one of the most ancient ideas, and this is what we study in the third episode about the theological elements of Christian anti-Semitism, that what stands between this world and utopia, and it's not a coincidence that all the nice words are on the side of Palestinianism as the mask for anti-Zionism, rights, equality, freedom, justice. So the notion that there is a utopia out there, and the only thing that stands between us and utopia is the collective Jew, is one of the most ancient and most dangerous ideas. So once you see how all of this comes together, how the laundering of Zionism is racism, Israel's apartheid, Israel committing genocide, how the laundering of those ideas through international bodies is part of the Soviet playbook, you cannot unsee it. It all becomes very clear what the strategy is, how it operates, what it seeks to achieve, and where is the end of it, the very dangerous end of it, if it's not fought back.
One of the interesting questions that I saw in that you deal with in the course is also, how is it there are so many Jews, so many, I take that back, but there's many, it seems like, at least, who are anti-Zionist. Now, I guess anti-Zionist Jews it's a wide spectrum. You could say ultra-Orthodox Jews to some extent are anti-Zionist, right? They don't serve in the army. I was just yesterday at the what's known in Hebrew as Lishkat HaGiyus, the IDF induction center. My second daughter is 17 and going through the process, so I dropped her off as starting with what's known as the Tzav Rishon, and you see all of these here in Jerusalem, at least, it's in a ultra-Orthodox neighborhood, and all these ultra-Orthodox young men are coming to declare, as the word is used, that they are not going to serve. So you could say that the ultra-Orthodox are anti-Zionist. Then you have people like Jill Stein, who you mentioned before, who are Jewish and also anti-Zionist. But what do you think it is about Zionism and Jews? Is it the sense of guilt that we carry with us? Like, what is it?
So in the course, we separate between anti-Zionism essentially before the birth of the State of Israel, in which we talk about it mostly as an intra-Jewish discussion, where Jews were communists and Bundists and religiously opposed to Zionism, but that was part of a genuine, honest debate about what's the best way for Jews to live in the modern world. And when Jews were communists and Bundists and opposed Zionism, they did it with a true belief that this is the best way forward for the Jewish people. And we talk in the course that the verdict of history was very cruel to all those ideological alternatives, whether it's assimilation in Europe or communism or Bundism. Basically, it's not that they lost in what you would call the marketplace of ideas. They were very well argued. They were powerful ideas. It's just that the verdict of history was cruel to those alternatives. But a lot of people try to claim today that to be an anti-Zionist Jew in the present is no different than being an anti-Zionist Jew at the end of the 19th century or the early 20th century. And we highlight that there is a massive difference between doing it in an era where there are different competing ideas and the verdict of history is not clear, and doing it in an era where you actually already know the history, the state of Israel already exists, and now you're placing yourself there. Putting aside theological argument, Jews who are theologically opposed to Zionism because they want us to wait for the Messiah, putting aside those arguments, I believe that most anti-Zionist Jews today are essentially responding to the historical massive social pressure on Jews to essentially convert. It's a secular conversion, but essentially to sell out their
secular, but
people.
ideological to some extent.
Exactly.
Also.
Exactly. Ultimately, Jews are a minority. Historically, there are massive, massive social pressures to leave the Jewish people, to adopt the universal vision, whether it's Christianity or the secularized vision of the ideology right now. And I think at the end of the day, what we're seeing is Jews who have decided to continue to hand over a pound of flesh as the price of acceptance.
So before I let you go, Einat, let's bring it all back together for where we started. President Joe Biden has long said that you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist, and that I am a Zionist. When looking at recent decisions, and in general, the way his policies have been vis-a-vis this war, is Joe Biden a Zionist according to your course?
He is very much a Zionist in his genuine support for the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their homeland. To the extent that he's the one charting the foreign policy for the last few months, I think it's mostly a massive, massive error and misunderstanding on multiple fronts. A misunderstanding of the enemy. I think one of the biggest errors he made, and I think in many ways almost condemned Israel to be unable to win this war, is when he said that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians. The entire Hamas military strategy rests on the fact that Hamas knows that they're operating among a hugely supportive population.
Right.
And so that's a big mistake. The idea that you can be waffly on a key ally and that would project well on American power. The fact that they didn't say clearly, Israel is going to win, however long that takes. The fact that they normalized the notion that we need to negotiate for the hostages. I know we're 7 months in, but I'm still appalled by that. In my world leaders would have stood in Rafah on the Egyptian side on October 8th and would have said, Israel owes you nothing. You do not get to kidnap people from their beds on a Shabbat morning, and then Israel has to negotiate their release. The notion that Qatar is an ally rather than an insidious enemy, those are massive, massive errors that I think ultimately the U.S. will look back at and think of them as massive errors. And right now, we, much more than the U.S., are paying the price. And I will say that the people in Gaza are also paying the price. This could have been a much quicker war. The hostages could have been released much, much earlier. But in many ways, Israel was forced from day one to be Houdini, not just have our hands tied behind our backs, but tied and tied and tied in multiple chains, and then somehow still make it work.
Einat, thank you very much for joining us. Good luck with the course online. People, find it, Google it. You'll be able to discover Einat Wilf Zionism Course. Those are all the words you need to find it online, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Thank you again for joining us at our latest episode of JPPI's podcast webinar. You can find us, as usual, Mondays and Thursdays for more episodes. In the meantime, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very much.